I've also on my travels have been all over the country in the last year. And everywhere we go, it says want help wanted.
Yep.
$18 an hour to work at McDonald's. We're paying $250 for an application. Uh, I know there's a lot of forces at work there. What do you make of that? It feels as though we have at once a decrease in labor force participation. And at the same time, we also have increased pressure on wages going up. No one can hire who they want to hire. We've also had an influx of illegal immigrants. How do we square all of those things up to actually divine what's happening in the economy?
Well, it's hard, but I do think one commonsensical thing to do is to stop printing money to give it to people. Like that does destroy some sort of incentive to work. This is not a new right talking point. This is just sort of classic republicanism, but I do think there's something to that. People will not, yeah, $18 an hour is a lot to work at McDonald's, but people won't want to do that if, their opportunity cost is higher. And so they'll just do something else. If it's cheaper to be on welfare, they'll be on welfare. If it's cheaper to, you know, um, figure out some other arrangement, they'll do it. So I think we should have a safety net. I think that we should have welfare. I don't think we should think of these things as sort of permanent systems. And I think that's what the Democrats want to take us to. They want to take us to this place where you have a permanent underclass that's on the dole. That yeah, maybe they don't have any skills, but it's okay because you're just sending them money. I think it's like really bad even for the people receiving that. So I would be looking to make sure our safety net is a net that catches people and it's supposed to bounce them back up, get in the workforce, right? But you cannot destroy the motivation to work. There's a cultural component too. Like I think for so long our education system's been broken. We no longer ask anything of our children. We just lower standards every year, get more people graduating. Their test scores suck, so there's a huge problem. So let's send more money into the schools, and it just becomes this whole horrible system. But I think people through it just people basically stop believing in themselves. Like I think there's a huge cultural problem where nobody feels like they have any agency. Nobody feels um, like they can go and actually make something of themselves unless they were already born on second base. I think that's a huge problem. It's hard to know exactly how to fix it, but I do think it's a problem. It's like the tyranny of low expectations, and then it becomes this self-fulfilling feedback loop. And it seems out of but the old Republican talking point, like, oh, just work hard, make your own luck, and like you'll bootstrap yourself, and like here's an example of someone who did it. That's also sort of demotivational because people feel like they can't do it. I think they actually could. I think people are way more powerful and have more individual agency than they think. But decline is all around us, and they're in. If you're sitting in a school that sucks, your teacher, is either teaching you left wing garbage, or if you're lucky, they're not doing that, but they're still failing to teach you the basics. They're failing to sort of inspire you to go and like learn a skill, learn a trade, like figure out how to get the basics together in your own life because you are in charge. Like that's not a message that we teach young people. So again, not something you can fix with one piece of legislation, but like I see that cultural decline all around us. And the answer is not just to say, well, our own kids are messed up, so let's just like import a bunch of hardworking immigrants. Like that feels really wrong. That actually feels like we're really giving up on our own people.
Yeah, I agree with that. Supply and demand is certainly a factor, and the supply of labor is certainly affected by the amount of assistance that they're getting from the federal government. I'm hearing, without it being said explicitly, that I'm assuming that you're an advocate of using the government for very specific industrial policy reasons. If that is true or not, please let me know. And if it is true, how would you use the government to guide the economy? What would you invest in? How would you invest in it? Would you use incentives? Would you use tariffs? What is your plan for getting, and this is really tough, right? Because we're talking about a super complex system here where you can't really say we want this specific outcome. You have to just sort of control the parameters in the system. But how would you use the government in terms of industrial policy, tariffs, subsidies, et cetera, to affect the economic outcome that you're seeking?
Yeah, I look. I want markets to be as free as possible domestically. Like I grew up reading Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman, then got into the Austrian school stuff. Like I've been down the rabbit hole on the sort of libertarian free market economic stuff, and I think it's I think it's directionally right. I think it's powerful. I think markets should be as free as possible domestically. I don't think you can, pick winners and losers. I don't think the federal government should be subsidizing. Like, if anything, we subsidize, soybeans and sugar and all this stuff that actually has all these downstream effects that I think people like us sort of see and talk about, but mostly get ignored by Congress. So I don't want to pick winners and losers. I don't want to invest in, clean tech companies like Solyndra. Like, that's an example of how not to do it. But I do think we should be investing in infrastructure. I just think this $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is mostly crap. And the problem is we lack state capacity so badly. Our state capacity is diminished so much that it becomes almost farcical to suggest that the government can actually do a big engineering project. Like we built the Hoover Dam. I was reading a book to my kids the other night and talking about building the Hoover Dam, which I guess at the bottom of the base has 600 feet of concrete. And to get all that concrete that wide and that high, they had to run the machines for 2 years straight to build that. They electrified the site and lit it up at night, and machines were rolling for 2 years. It's like a really impressive engineering project. And then 80 years later or whatever, our earth moving technology is better. We have computers, like everything is better. We ought to be able to do that way easier. And actually you just couldn't, because you imagine the bureaucracy and the union labor and the rules and environmental impact studies and just the political will to make it happen. Like, we can't do that anymore. But I think the mistake is to say, well, the government sucks and it messes up everything it touches, and so laissez-faire, we got to be libertarian about it. We have to reclaim some state capacity to be able to do the basics. The government is in charge of building roads, so it should be really good at that. And I feel like we've just let that go. So I want to be domestically, I want to be disciplined about what the government should do. I want to be humble about what it shouldn't do. But one of the biggest roles to play domestically is to just cut away at the regulatory overgrowth, at the bureaucracy, so that people can actually feel like they can build. I feel like innovation is still being restrained by just the system, by everything. If you look at trying to innovate in healthcare right now, we sort of have the worst of all worlds. We have a regulated, quasi-socialized system that still sort of lets the profit motive operate. And so for-profit hospital systems, which are basically cartels at this point, operate in this hyper-regulated sphere. And you just see this regulatory capture where service quality goes down, prices go up. It's very bad for everybody except the people in charge. So I think that's bad, and we just have to clear it all away. The one place where I would depart from free trade, or from free trade and sort of laissez-faire, is domestically. You mentioned tariffs. I think, or internationally, we need more tariffs. If China is dumping steel into the U.S., I think maybe it's a challenge for a young senator to go and articulate that and show people and convince them. But I think that is true, and so we have to do it, and then we have to put a tariff on China. There's no reason that every country should have sort of unfettered access to our markets if we can trace with specificity how that is hurting the average American. And so I think domestically, you want things to be as free and open as possible, and internationally, especially for national security reasons and sort of domestic reasons, you just want to watch and see how things are going and respond accordingly. We don't do that.
Speaking about innovation, in your position, how's deal flow looking? I mean, are you telling me that you're seeing a dearth of deal flow here?
No, it's actually really good, because I think there's a lot of capital and venture capital, right? I mean, there's a lot of money out there. Nobody knows what to do with it. So paradoxically, I think when everything else grinds to a halt, right? Peter talks about the world of bits versus atoms. The one place you can still really innovate is bits. And it's probably a really good time to go start an internet company. It's probably a really bad time to go start a nuclear engineering firm, or, to come up with a sort of nanobot anti-cancer therapeutic or something, the hard tech. And we're still seeing some interesting stuff there. But the point is, there's a lot of capital. Nobody knows what to do with it. And so in some ways, if you're trying to build a huge business that scales, it's a great time, because you'll get funded and you'll get a chance. But again, I think as important as venture capital is, somehow most Americans' daily lives are very downstream from that. They're not too much. So I think VC is a healthy sector right now.
But I mean, my question on that was specifically about, if anybody in the country was going to be seeing innovation it would be you at your desk getting deal flows from innovators looking for support. And it sounds to me like you said, in some aspects of the economy, that's high. The flow is high, and in some, it's bad. I talked to JD Vance the other day, and he said, maybe not on my show, but in another speech, he said that he very strongly wants to encourage the production of real goods in the United States and discourage the production of data goods in the United States for the purposes of sort of a holistic response to what's happening. When you build things in the United States, you manufacture them in the United States, you ship them around. These are real people with real jobs and real families in America, whereas the data business, as we've seen, they can house their assets offshore. It disconnects them from being in America and being Americans. To what extent do you agree with that? And do you think that that is a reasonable endeavor? And if so, how do you do it by just simply clearing regulation and not actually being more proactive in maybe subsidies or other proactive industrial policy in the U.S.?
Well, I agree with the first part. I think we should be encouraging sort of domestic production of actual stuff. I don't think I discourage sort of new internet companies or data companies or anything like that. I mean, I think those can be important. I think they become a problem, as discussed, when they become so big and so successful that they just, they obviously need to be treated in a different way. But I'm pro internet company. I think people should start more. I think there's a lot of innovation that can still be done if you manage not to just get immediately bought up by Facebook or Google or something. There's still many cool internet businesses to build, hopefully not based on targeted advertising. But I totally agree that we got to do more domestic production. Like we just do. Obviously, like your country is in some sense really weak and vulnerable if you can't make anything here at home, or if you can't satisfy, your domestic needs, your domestic consumer demands. If you can't produce that yourself, the definition at the mercy of other countries. And when the whole geopolitical, world sort of works, that works. It looks until it doesn't, and then boom, COVID hits, or like, what's the next shock going to be? And all of a sudden, you can't make the masks that we thought we needed. We couldn't make antibiotics, couldn't make computer chips. So I think this stuff is really bad, and we gotta onshore. I think one way that is, with sort of protectionist trade policies. It's possible to go overkill, and you got to be sort of wise and intelligent about it. But we need more of that. I do actually think that clearing out domestic overregulation and then setting up protections to sort of get a level playing field going, and if anything, privilege our own domestic producers. I think that goes a long way. Should the government actually invest directly in certain industries? Maybe. But again, my concern is that's pretty theoretical given the current technical competence of the government.